Great, thank you very much, and thanks for coming back from morning tea. I know that the lawyers aren't always the draw card on these events, so I do appreciate some of you coming in to listen to what I've got to say. It'll be 15 minutes, so I'm going to have to talk pretty quickly to cover a few things. What I want to talk about is land tenure in WA and some of the land access issues associated with mining projects, and also looking at the new land reforms that are coming. I titled this Mining versus Land Reform because I've been doing this work for almost 30 years, and I think I haven't seen the amount of buzz around getting access to land as we're experiencing at the moment. And there's a real, I think, beginning of an era of competition that's going to have quite an impact on mining. So in order to talk about this, I do need to talk a bit about the background. So what I wanted to mention here is just explain how our land system works in WA. 92% of our state is Crown land. What that means is only 8% is privately held, 92% is vested in the state, and the state determines how that gets held and allocated. And that is a very separate and distinct system of land ownership to mineral resources, geothermal resources, petroleum resources. All of those resources are all separately vested in the Crown, and the Crown gets to determine how they are dealt with. I should just get to the right slide. And so what that means is you have a system of layers of rights of access and ownership that do overlap. And so it's very important that they coexist with one another. And so what we're going to see with the burgeoning competition is some more, I think, more conflict of activity. And not to mention, of course, another layer, which is native title rights and interests, which also overlaps all these other interests. So there's a variety of legislation that governs all of this. The Crown land, the 92% is governed by the Land Administration Act here in WA. You'll all be familiar with the Mining Act. We've also got the Geothermal, Petroleum and Geothermal Energy Resources Act and the Native Title Act, which is the Commonwealth legislation that governs native title. So I want to talk a bit about the current LAA framework and how that interacts with mining, so I can then put the context to the changes that are coming. This is the types of tenure that you can are currently available for other land users, so generally non-mining uses. So very briefly, the investigation license, or the Section 91 license, we call it. This is how people get on the ground if they want to do a little bit of geotech work, flora and fauna surveys, ground truthing, that sort of thing, and they apply to the minister. They're just a license. They're not a registered interest in land. They're non-exclusive, and they're generally just for a couple of years. So when a proponent of a project wants to then build something, they move to generally a Crown lease, which is an exclusive piece of tenure, exclusive possession lease, just like when you lease a house or lease a shop. And that is how you can generally build and construct and operate your project. They usually last for around 50 years. A Crown easement is the non-exclusive tenure, again, like a normal land easement you might be familiar with. And these are used for linear infrastructure. So things like pipelines, transmission lines, roads, etc. So they crisscross the state, and that's, of course, why they need to be non-exclusive. I've mentioned pastoral leases. They're a very strange, unique beast. They are a creature of statute. They're sort of a non-exclusive lease, which is an unusual oxymoron from a legal perspective. And you'd be, most mining companies will have had to deal with pastorals in their area and be quite familiar with them. And I mentioned options to lease. They're not a different type of tenure, so to speak, but an option in the usual way. It's of getting your foot on the piece of land that you might want to develop a project on. And we're going to see a lot more of those coming forward. I wanted to talk about how LAA tenure gets granted. There's a lot of confusion around this, and it's very different to the way the mining process works. And so there is, it's kind of unfamiliar to a number of mining companies. Basically, the Minister for Lands, who has the control of all that Crown land, is vested with substantial discretion around how to grant this. And there's no particular format that you need to make your application in. It's not like you're filling the form in the same way as you do in the Mining Act. It's a very non-transparent process. You make your application. There's a lot of internal processes run by DPLH, the department that administers the LAA, and they will run an intragovernmental referral process by which they engage with all the other agencies to talk about the grant of tenure. So it's an important one to understand that it doesn't work. You don't get the same level of sort of transparency as you might if people are making applications over your over tenements, and you can go onto TenGraph and have a look. So in terms of interaction with the Mining Act currently, it is generally the scheme within the regime of the legislation is to protect mining interests. There is that sort of economic rationalism idea that mining interests are the highest and best use in some respects, so will give the greatest return to the state. So that gets protected in a couple of ways. This includes the fact that there's the Section 91 licence, as I mentioned, can't be granted by the Minister for Lands without the Minister for Mines' consent. Similarly, land in a mineral field, and that is basically the whole of the state, can't be leased or disposed of, again, without the consent of the Minister for Mines. So the Minister for Land has broad discretion subject to that requirement to get consent. And that's how the mining companies get involved. Most of you will probably have received at some point, or you may have heard about this process by which you'll get a notice from DMIRS. They've got a whole division that deals with this sort of stuff. And they'll come back to you and say, we're going to grant this, or this has been applied for, do you have any comments? And so the note goes out to tenement holders and tenement applicants. And other than that, just noting that when a Crown grant happens, or when land is granted, there is explicitly a reservation of the rights of the existing tenement holder. So if you go first, you get some acknowledgement of that. It is not all one way, though, and no doubt many of you are familiar with the sort of the private land veto, as it's called, the fact that private land holders, so freeholders, get a veto over the top 30 metres of certain areas of private land. So in a Crown land perspective, it works slightly differently. The tenement can get granted, but you can't carry out activities in those areas. Again, top 30 metres only, and this is without the consent of the landholder. So that's basically why you might end up negotiating with your pastoralist, because you want to have access to land that's near a bore, for example. And there's obviously compensation payable. So I think most of you would have come across this before, but it's compensation to both owners and occupiers of land for any loss that they incur as a result of the mining. It's a bit subtler than that, but that's kind of an overview. So I want to talk about pastoral land and then the reforms, which is what we'll sort of really want to hear about today. So pastoral reforms are coming, and I just set the context of that. The darker blue shows you what the pastoral estate is. It's about 36% of the state currently. What that means is that land is locked up and can only be used for pastoral purposes. Pastoralists or any others could only get access to that land from a Crown land perspective, can only get access to the land and use it for commercial grazing. There's a little bit of diversification allowed, but it's very minimal. And so what that means is that land, and obviously you'll see it coexists or is coincident with some of the state's best wind and solar resources, is all locked up and can't be used for other purposes. And so that is really what is driving this at the moment. So there's been pastoral reform touted in the past. There was legislation in 2016, but really now it's this energy transition that has given the momentum to get this legislation through. It's net zero climate change policies. The government has very clearly got a roadmap to how they want to develop green hydrogen projects in the state. I think this comment from Roger Cook sums it up really. Investment in industries such as renewable hydrogen, carbon farming and renewable energy projects will create more WA jobs and place our state at the forefront of the rapidly growing renewable energy sector. So with that in mind, this is the proposed reforms I'm talking about. It's the Land and Public Works Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. So where we're at the moment is the consultation draft. It's been talked about for at least a year, but the consultation draft came out in October. There's been a lot of presentations and industry engagement about what it's going to look like. The consultation is closed. We understand it's back with the parliamentary drafts people to make changes that came out of that consultation. There was an intention for it to be introduced to Parliament in the middle of the year. They obviously didn't achieve that. It was then expected to be end of the year. There's 5 sitting days left. It hasn't gone in yet. But the news from DPLH yesterday was it's soon. So we might still see it hit Parliament in the next week or so. The key change, and the one I want to talk about, is the fact that there's a new type of tenure coming. It's called the diversification lease. The diversification lease is a new type of broad-scale lease that will open up the land for use for other than pastoral. So all of the range lands and the current pastoral estate will potentially be able to be used for many other purposes. The purposes are not going to be prescribed by the Act, so it's anything that you might come up with that would be appropriate, or proponents may come up with that's going to be appropriate for broad-scale use. It has to be broad-scale and low intensity. So these are some examples that DPLH has put out as to what they're expecting. Carbon farming, renewable energy and conservation offsets are sort of obvious ones. Also Aboriginal economic development. And it can be multiple, there can be concurrent uses. So I know there's already a lot of discussions going on with pastoralists about you also having pastoral included. You can't have a diversification lease of pastoral alone, but it could be combined with other uses. Some of the key aspects, broad scale use I've mentioned. It's going to be non-exclusive, so it's like a pastoral lease in that respect. There will be this concept of nominated areas of exclusivity, and what that means really is nominated areas that where mining will be excluded. and they'll be set out in the lease from the outset. So when the lease is granted, those will be clarified. There can't be so many of that really it should be an exclusive use land, at least. So the idea being that there's just some high intensity use. You might have a plant or some sort of facility sitting on the lease, but the rest of it would still be non-exclusive. There's no set term. It'll be whatever the project that is proposed will support. And really importantly, they won't coexist with pastoral leases. So in order for someone to get these, if it's over pastoral land currently, that pastoral lease will need to be surrendered. So how do you go about getting one? The legislation is very non-prescriptive. As I mentioned, the Minister for Lands has great discretion. So what that means is, what the state has done is put out a policy as to how they're going to assess these applications. And these are some of the criteria they've identified. The large area is the obvious thing. Your use has to be something that you need a large area for. And the use also has to be something that the land that you're looking at or the proponents are looking at is appropriate for that. It has to provide social, economic or environmental benefit to the state or the region. Where it's applicable, there'll be some sort of social or economic benefit to the Aboriginal community. And then the proponents themselves will need to demonstrate capability, capacity and experience. So despite the fact we don't have legislation and that this is all just only policy, we are certainly aware that there's a number of proponents already out talking to miners and pastoralists and TOs about their plan to try and do this as soon as the legislation comes in. So it's going to move relatively quickly. The actual process of getting a diversification lease will be by a private treaty or potentially by some sort of public process, such as a tender and auction, which we might expect if there's a lot of competition. What we do know is the first few applications are going to go through to the Cabinet. And I mention that because it really gives you an idea of how significant this reform is, but also how we are at the forefront of a really once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for WA to set itself up as the powerhouse for renewable energy. You would have heard a lot about that in the last 6 months. So the state is taking this sort of very seriously, and they'll be looking at all of the applications. I think I heard that there were 7 proponents that are already discussing what they want. Clearly, a lot of this is going to be around the Pilbara, because any of these major renewable projects will need to be somewhere where there is going to be sufficient demand for the energy that's being produced. Where there is competition, the state has identified some of the things that they'll take into account. So they'll be looking at weighing up obviously the benefit of any competing projects, looking at how existing land interest holders are being dealt with, ensuring there's some sort of diversity. And once again, that sort of usual catch-all in a policy, which is just whatever else the minister wants to take into account. The key thing to understand, I've mentioned, is that pastoral leases will need to be surrendered. The 16.3 process I talked about, where the consent of the Minister for Mines is needed if the Minister for Lands wants to grant any tenure, will be needed, and obviously traditional owners, because this will trigger a new future act for the purposes of the Native Title Act. So there'll be the proponents of these kinds of projects will be looking at those 3 sort of gates, if you like, and no doubt talking to miners as well as part of that process. So the last thing I want to just mention is this bill is amending not only the Land Administration Act and the Public Works Act, but also the Mining Act. So these are some of the changes that are coming to the Mining Act. 16.3 consent, I've mentioned already the Ministers for Mines consent being required for the grant of tenure in a mineral field. The change there is that not only will the diversification lease require the consent when it's initially granted, but also if the purpose is going to change. So if it was granted for the purpose of a renewable project and then tourism or carbon farming is going to be added as a purpose, that will go back to the Minister for Mines. Similarly, those exclusive areas, so there's areas where mining is going to be excluded, will also, any change to that will go back to the Minister for Mines. So the miners will get a sort of second bite if there's one of these changes. What that means is that once it's sort of locked in, everyone will know where those excluded areas are. I should mention that 16.3 consent, and this isn't changing, the Minister can only say yes or no. There's no ability for the Minister to impose any conditions. So it's a bit of a blunt instrument, and it does obviously mean that there cannot be too much weighing up, if you like, around the interest of the mining versus the project. Where the conditions might come in is in the negotiation that a proponent might have with a miner in the area, and you'll do that contractually. The leaseholder consent, so this is that point where the top 30 metres, there won't be access to the top 30 metres. Those provisions are changing, and they're going to create a new 100-metre buffer around what they call substantial structures. So think about the wind turbine, 100 metres around that. You won't be able to get access to the top 30 metres without the consent of the diversification leaseholder. And the other one is also fibre optic cable and electrical cable, 100 metres around that. That caused quite a lot of consternation in the consultation, so I'll be interested to see if that's been taken on board. And then finally, the compensation regime will be the same as it is for pastoral lessees, which means the leaseholder will only be entitled to compensation for loss from damage to improvements or for substantial loss of income. The only issue there, of course, is someone's income out of a wind farm will be substantially more than it is out of running cattle. So there will be some follow-on compensation issues, I think. That's the end. I'm sorry, it's very quick. There's no questions as I understand it. So I'm around for the morning. Feel free to catch me if you want to have any questions or want to chat about anything further. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Claire. There are plenty of seats up the front here if you'd like to come up. I'm not going to pick on you if you come and sit close to me. I'll be gentle with you. Moho Resources Managing Director Ralph Winter is a commerce professional with over 17 years of extensive experience in the mining and exploration industry. He has specialized in corporate affairs and finance, marketing and promotion, and business development in both exploration and development companies. He's passionate about advancing the company's critical mineral strategy and creating shareholder value, and he's an avid supporter as well as a former director of Breast Cancer Care WA. Please welcome Ralph Winter.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Vertical Events and RIU for putting on a fantastic show again this year. Yeah, look, Moho Resources, we're a small company, but we've got a lot on and a lot of potential. So I'm hoping to highlight that very quickly. It's not a lot of time to go through what we've got, but hopefully we can get there. Standard disclaimer and compliance. This will be on the website and ASX, so please feel free to read that. So in terms of the company itself, we've had a bit of a shift into exploring more from that critical minerals perspective. We've always been a gold and nickel explorer, but we've now shifted a little bit more and expanded that into other things as well, such as rare earths and lithium. We think there's a lot of growth potential for that in the future, and I think a lot of companies do, and that's why we're doing it. But we've also got fantastic ground that has access to those. So we've accumulated a very diverse project portfolio across the country, really, and we'll run through a few of those shortly. But key to that as well is having the right people, having good quality people that can actually explore those and target the right things for you. So we've spent a fair bit of time putting together what we believe is a world-class technical team to advance those projects. As a small company, we also have potential early access to cash flow potential through a small gold resource that we have near Kalgoorlie. But like I said, it's really about Moho investing in the future of essential minerals for sustainable technologies moving forward. So a few key facts about the company. We have 10 projects across 2 states. We're targeting 5 separate commodities, or have exposure to 5 separate commodities. We've got over 5,500 square kilometers of ground to cover. We've got 2 joint ventures with IGO, over 30,000 meters of drilling already completed, and 12 different drill campaigns. So as you can see, it's very diverse and a lot of potential for growth for the company moving forward. The key part to this, I guess, and because we've always been gold and nickel, we've kept to the nickel side of it, and we've expanded our focus on exploration for that. Probably a big part of that in this first instance is our project at Kalgoorlie, which is about 50 kilometers north of Kal, and sits right next door to Poseidon's Silver Swan, Black Swan nickel mine. So the green tenements over here, that's the Silver Swan, Black Swan mine, and we hold everything else around that particular project. We have done a lot of work there in terms of gold, and like I said, we've been expanding our nickel exploration around that area as well. The first cab off the rank on that one is Black Swan South, which sits about 4 kilometers south of Silver Swan mine itself. We drilled 12 holes into that a few months back. We're waiting on the assays from that at the moment from the lab. Unfortunately, the labs are still pretty slammed. But the drilling did successfully outline the basal contact of the target of the commodite ultramafics. And we believe it's it is looking like it's open to the southeast, but we have closed it off on the north. But look, it was a first pass program. It gives us enough inspiration to sort of advance it further and plan a follow-up program to that as well, which once we get the results back, we can model it up and see where that'll lead us. Second part of that is our Dukes and Dukes North, which sits to the north. It's about 7 kilometers northwest of Silver Swan. It sits on it has a nickel and copper soil coincident anomaly over a 3.6 kilometer magnetic anomaly. So it looks quite interesting. We went and we drilled 7 holes into this as an initial pass. The reason we only did 7 was because we could only drill on existing tracks at this point because we don't have heritage clearance on this just yet. The heritage survey is due to be completed shortly. It was supposed to be done in November, but it was pushed back to December, unfortunately. But look, it's looking very interesting. We intersected ultramafics in all of those holes. And the comment from our chief geo is that it appears to be a layered ultramafic intrusive. Sorry, it appears to be a layered ultramafic intrusive sill. So we'll see what that means. But essentially, I guess Nova Bollinger was a layered ultramafic intrusive sill. So I'm not saying it's necessarily that. It's just saying it there. That's the geology that we're seeing. The other one that we drilled recently, T3 and T4 nickel targets, which sit 5 kilometers to the west of Silver Swan. These were chasing up some historic Nyquist RAB holes that were drilled about 10 years ago. There was some interesting initial results that they had drilled in their RAB holes, and basically this was to follow that up and see if we could extend that out. And initial indications are positive. We probably won't get the results for both Dukes and T3 and T4 for about 6 to 8 weeks, unfortunately, because of the labs, but they're coming, and we'll hopefully get that out to the market sooner rather than later. So the other part of the strategy for the nickel here is not only focusing on what tenements we had, we also did a deal with a company called Yandal Resources, which has hosts the ground to our west. That sits on this ultramafic zone over here. That was sort of a joint deal we did where we took on the nickel rights and basically gave them the gold rights on those. We also sold them a few option tenements that we had with a local prospector, and we retained a royalty on that one as well. So we felt like it was a win-win, but it gives us exposure to further ultramafic exploration around that area as well. So the other part of the critical minerals exploration is really the rare earths and the lithium. So we started to look at what projects do we have, what information do we have, and what can we start to target in relation to that. Some of the ones that sort of jumped out initially were Burracoppin, which was an initial gold exploration project. But in the analysis that we did of the assays that we've done and some further soil sampling, we have established that there is potential for rare earth and lithium on those tenements as well. Based on that, we then went and pegged additional ground to cover all the channels that exist around our tenements, so the green ones, to basically expand as much of that ground as possible for further rare earth exploration. So the first part of that is the rare earths that we established within the soil survey that we recently did, which has some interesting numbers. Now, to note, this is all soils as a first pass, but indicatively, the numbers look comparable to peers in the market. We obviously have to go back and do some further drilling, further sampling, and we've got some drilling planned as well and gravity surveys, in particular over our target 1 over here. Which is looking quite interesting, and hopefully we'll be able to get a rig out there before the end of the year. If not, it'll be early next year, and do some actual drilling into it. So like I said, it's all based on soils, but the numbers are looking positive as an indication. And the other thing to note here is that a lot of the work that we're talking about here, you can see they're all on lines. Essentially, they're all done along roadsides. So we need to expand our soil sampling around those as well and extend the anomalism essentially, if we can. Sorry, excuse me. So the other part of that is the lithium. So in the same geochemical survey, we had our geochemist Richard Carver also look at the potential for lithium. And essentially he identified 4 main zones, as you can see up there. Now the key to these are they're about 5 kilometers in diameter each. So you're talking about around about 100 square kilometers of initial target zones. But keeping in mind that we need to expand the sampling here, so it's very early stages, but there are encouraging initial indications. So like I said, what we're doing at the moment is we're going to be drilling in this area here in the not too distant future and do some further work. And as a proof of concept, if that works out, we can then follow those out and target the other ones as well. Being that we're in the wheat belts, we do have to work with the farmers, and we have good relationships with the farmers there already. So we sort of work around their schedules. They're busy harvesting at the moment, so hopefully once that's done, we can get on the ground and do a bit more work. So the other part of the rare earth story is Peak Charles, which is looking quite interesting. So Peak Charles was one of 7 projects we picked up in a deal we did with a consultancy called Whistlepipe Consulting late last year. Peak Charles was originally a nickel target, nickel copper PGE target. But since we actually picked up the ground in that deal, quite a large province of rare earth ionic clay exploration has opened up around us. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of companies. You got OD6 in here, and Meeka Metals, which is on later, and a whole bunch of other companies around here that are sort of targeting those ionic clay rare earths. So we believe that there's some interesting potential there for rare earths. It's very early stages. We're still in the process of getting our land access and some early stage orientation sampling done. But that's one to keep an eye on, because I think if we can get a rig in there as well in the not too distant future, which we hope to do in the next few months, we should see some interesting results come out of that as well and do some further geophysics. The other part of that strategy, so the Whistlepipe deal that we did was an amalgamation of the consultants that run Whistlepipe originally did some of the targeting work for the Gonaville Julimar discovery. They went around and they targeted certain projects around WA, and we picked up all of those in that deal. So you've got all the yellow ones are related to that. Peak Charles we've already spoken about. Some of these aren't granted as yet, but most of them are. So what we're doing is, like I said, we're doing initial sampling orientation across a lot of those projects. Land access, which takes a while because a lot of it is farmland. And there's crown land, and there's also forests and so on that we need to consider as well. So there's a lot of planning that goes around that. And then we've got to wait on the other ones to be done. So we're planning all the geophysics and the orientation surveys and the follow-up work from this point. This is probably more early next year to mid-late next year that these will start to flow through. But it's looking very interesting, and it's something to bear in mind. So like I said early on, the other part of the project at Silver Swan is the gold. So we have a small resource there, around 21,000 ounces, grading 2.5 grams. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's only on this very small little blob in here, which is about 300-meter strike length. We've got 2.5 kilometers of extent going up from there into the Hodges ground to the north. We've done some further drilling on that, some air core drilling preliminary, and there's some encouraging gold results that have come back from that. What we are looking to do now is find ways to monetize this project. So whether that's do a deal with another party or even advance it to production in our own end, we're investigating all those options now, but there is potential to do that for us. And we believe with the swing in the gold now and the growth in the gold potential moving forward, that's definitely something that will, be good for the company moving forward. So just the resource itself, like I said, it's about 21,000 ounces at 2.5 grams, but there's a lot of scope for improvement and expansion of that. The metallurgy is very good as well. Preliminary metallurgy was 95% recovery. So in terms of the resource itself, it's quite robust, and we think probably quite easily mined and monetized. Corporately, where the company stands today, so like a lot of small companies, we've had a little bit of a smash in the last sort of 6 months or so, but it is a good opportunity at this point with the upcoming information and work that we've got going to get in while the price is depressed, and hopefully pick it up on the upswing. So in terms of holding, around 34% holds, the top 20 hold around 34%. We've only got 200 million shares on issue. Current market cap's about 4.8 million. But with our company, it is something that moves very quickly because we're tightly held. That can go up and down very, very quickly. So, all we need is some good results to come out, and that should hopefully accelerate that very quickly. Just in terms of the board and the team, Terry Streeter, which a lot of you may know, is our chairman. Storied history in nickel in the past. Obviously, I'm the managing director. Shane Sadler was the managing director previously. I took over from him back in July. Shane stepped back, but he's still very actively involved on the technical side. And Adrian Larking's got a wealth of experience in terms of not only geology, but he's also a lawyer for his sins. And he's very beneficial for us moving forward. So just to cap off, just the stats there again. So look, we've got a lot of projects on the go, a lot of commodities, but what that does mean is it's a lot of upside potential that we're investigating. And I truly believe we're just getting started. So please take a look at it. And yeah, we got a long way to go. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralph. Iggy 10 has been considered a trailblazer in the lithium industry and is now trailblazing in the solid-state batteries. Iggy is Managing Director of Altech Chemicals, and he will join me after this short video clip.
Welcome to the Batteries of the Future report. There are some real downsides to today's lithium-ion batteries, stumbling blocks that are the focus of international discussion. The batteries can overheat through thermal runaway, which can result in devastating fires and explosions. They operate best in a fairly narrow temperature range between 15 and 35 degrees Celsius. And the lifespan of lithium-ion batteries is limited to between 7 and 10 years, depending on their application. On top of that, lithium-ion battery manufacturers are at the mercy of both supply and pricing of a range of critical metals. Take lithium, for example. It's the most critical component of a lithium-ion battery, and the price has jumped sixfold since the start of this year, 2022, adding upwards pressure to production costs. Add to that, cobalt is considered the greatest material supply chain risk for the industry in the short to medium term. And whilst the Democratic Republic of Congo produces about 70% of the world's supply, human rights abuses continue to raise ethical concerns. There are also supply chain concerns around graphite and copper, which make up the anode part of the battery. The industry is heavily reliant on China because it produces 90% of all graphite anode material. Therein lies geopolitical risk. A standard electric vehicle requires 2.5 times more copper than a standard internal combustion vehicle. A recent report suggests there aren't enough copper mines being built or expanded to provide all the copper needed to produce electric vehicles into the future. But an alternative does exist. The solution is Altech Chemicals Serenergy battery, which uses sodium alumina solid state.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the lithium-ion battery and where it's going to with solid state. So maybe a quick poll. Who has solar panels on your roof? Hands up. Oh, quite a lot of people. What about an electric car? Who's got an electric car? Oh, one. A Tesla, right? No. All right. So the lithium-ion battery industry have been talking about solid state technology. Do you understand what solid state technology is? Essentially, in this lithium-ion battery, you've got the cathode and the anode. And in the middle is a liquid electrolyte. It's actually flammable. And also there's a plastic separator. So when a lithium-ion battery is on fire, that's the fuel for the fire, the volatile liquid electrolyte. Solid state technology is replacing the liquid electrolyte to a ceramic piece. So essentially you have a ceramic piece that has no liquid there, and it allows the lithium to go back and forth. So that's where the industry is heading to, solid state technology. Now, as the video mentioned, lithium-ion batteries are prone to catching fire. Now, when it actually goes, it's called thermal runaway. Essentially, you have a chain reaction. The temperature soars to 600 degrees, and essentially, it's very difficult to put it out. And the reason for that, in a normal fire, if you douse the oxygen from the fire stops. But in a lithium-ion battery, the cathode part generates oxygen itself. So that's why it's nearly impossible to put out a lithium-ion battery fire. It also mentions, a lot of people don't realize that lithium-ion batteries don't work well in the cold climates. So at 0 degrees, the liquid electrolyte starts to be very viscous, and it slows the lithium-ion battery transfer. So it's very limited in the temperature range. The life of the battery, generally 10 years in the auto industry. And the reason for that is lithium deteriorates in the liquid electrolyte. And so because of the deterioration on charge and discharge, generally suppliers only guarantee 10 years life. And then finally, lithium-ion batteries are exposed to the critical metals prices. You saw lithium rise 6-fold in the last year. Ethical concerns with cobalt. 70% of the cobalt comes from the Republic of Congo, and there are child and labor issues, so ethical concerns on that supply. And then it also mentioned that 90% of graphite actually is supplied from China. So you can imagine all the batteries in the world relying on one country. And then finally, copper. 2.5 times more copper is used in an electric car than a normal car. And there's a recent report that says there's not enough copper mines being developed to even meet the EV demand. So the question is, can you have a battery that is totally fireproof, operates in the really cold climates, beyond 15-year mine life, life of the battery, totally lithium-free, totally cobalt-free, totally graphite-free, totally copper-free, and even manganese you can throw in there. This is our Serenergy battery. So essentially, it was developed by the German Institute, the Battery Institute, for the last 8 years. They spent nearly 35 million euros in the development. They operate a 25 million euro pilot plant. They've produced these batteries. So essentially, what we're doing is taking that technology and commercializing it. So essentially what we're doing is we're using common salt, what you have in room, and we are converting into a salt nickel battery. So this is 250 watts. 80 of these will power your whole house and take you off grid. So you can imagine a battery without lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper and graphite to be about 40% cheaper. So, and the reason this battery is very exciting is because we use solid state technology. There's no liquid electrolyte here. We use a ceramic tube. So it's therefore fireproof. Because we don't have a liquid electrolyte, this battery operates at 270 degrees internally. It's totally insulated, so you can touch it on the outside, but it's a bit like a mammal. It's got its own heat, and you can operate in a very cold climate, right down to -40 degrees. It also, because it hasn't got that liquid electrolyte, it has a life beyond 15 years because the sodium actually doesn't deteriorate in the charge and discharge. Now, this is some work that's been done out of Canberra, where they cycle these batteries, and you can see lithium generally degrades over the period of time. And the blue line is actually this type of battery, very stable. In fact, is growing in capacity, and there's a reason for that. So generally we use salt, sodium, very reactive material. It sits below lithium on the periodic table. If you remember your chemistry, sodium is very reactive. And essentially, this is the key to our battery. We don't use cobalt. The chemistry doesn't require cobalt to get the voltage or the energy capacity. We don't have any anodes in this battery. It's a self-forming anode, and I'll show you that in a second. Because we don't have any anodes, we don't have any copper and graphite on the anode side. So graphite-free and copper-free. And the batteries are actually ideal for the grid storage market. It's essentially a bit heavier, and that's why we position it to the grid storage or renewable energy market. And if you look at this graph, it shows on that side, you want a lot of energy. Up the top there, you want a lot of power. So if you want to have a sports car, you want a lot of nickel and cobalt there. But for renewable energy, you don't need that. So this is an ideal thing. Very equivalent to a lithium iron phosphate battery in energy. And we're targeting the grid storage market because it's growing at 28%. Everybody's focusing on EVs. This market is growing as fast, and this is really the growth sector. Now, this is some of the interesting technology. How does this battery work? Essentially, you've got a ceramic tube, which is the solid state. You've got an electrode in the middle, and you fill it with salt and nickel metal powder crystals. And you flood this ceramic with a nickel chloride medium. And this thing sits in a metal canister, which acts as the negative part of the battery. That's it. That's the battery. And this is what it looks like, the ceramic bit that fits in a metal canister. So what's the chemistry? When you charge the battery, the sodium ions leave the chloride, they transfer through the ceramic piece, and it forms molten sodium on the outside of the ceramic tube. And when you discharge it, the molten sodium dissolves and go back to salt. So the unique part of this battery, as you can see a cross-section, it forms its own anode when you charge, and it dissolves the anode when you discharge it. So that's the unique part of the battery. It's a self-forming anode. So that's the exciting bit about it. We don't have to use graphite and copper and so on. So how does it compare to other types of batteries? So you've got a whole list of things that compares. Essentially, the Serenergy battery, very similar energy density to lithium iron phosphate battery, longer cycle life, much safer, very low maintenance costs. So very comparable to the lithium iron phosphate battery. Now, if we were developing this technology ourselves, you would expect years and years to get to commercialization. Essentially, the technology had been developed by a German institute, the Fraunhofer Institute, which is owned by the German government. They have some 76 institutes in Germany, only about 30,000 employees, and their research budget is 2.9 billion every year. So we have a joint venture with the Fraunhofer Group. We happen to own 75% of the joint venture to commercialize the technology. Why? It's because they were looking for a partner that had land in Germany, that had the experience in battery background and developing projects. And essentially that's what. Let's have a look at the pilot plant they developed. So this is really advanced technology. This is 25 million euros of pilot plant that has been built and producing these batteries. So these batteries are in real life undergoing test work. So this the yellow battery there is a 5 kilowatt battery. As you guys see, it sits on the outside your house. The blue one is a 10 kilowatt battery. This is where the powder is mixed. A lot of the alumina is used to mix the ceramics. This is actually what the ceramic tube looks like. And then they have to calcine or sinter the ceramic tube. But the technology is, how do you make the tube that allows sodium to transfer through it without any liquid electrolyte? And that is really the technology that has been developed for the last 8 years. So really cool technology. Our job is to commercialize it. And we are building a 100 megawatt battery plant as our first phase. 75% our ownership, 25% Fraunhofer. We are positioned in Saxony, Germany, right on the border of Poland. A lot of EV manufacturing in that state. So that's why we picked that. And essentially, we've got to go through a bankable feasibility study, which would be about 10 to 12 months. And then we go straight into funding. So 100 megawatts is our first phase. Fraunhofer is estimated that the price of the battery should be 40% cheaper Well, why? We don't have lithium, we don't have cobalt, we don't have graphite, we don't have copper, we don't have manganese. So the most expensive part of the battery is actually nickel metal powder. We recently launched the first product, which is a 60 kilowatt pack. So 60 kilowatt, 100 amps per hour, 620 volts. So they would sit on a grid storage, neighborhood batteries, ideal for your home. Basically, what we're doing is taking the energy from the sun and shifting to the night, because currently, if you've got panels, you're producing excess power, putting it back in the grid at 4 cents, and then buying it back at night at 26 cents. It doesn't make sense. So this is the future. So our market is the renewable energy storage, and our vision is to then move to gigapanels. Peak shaving is also a very important thing, or arbitrage. I'll give you a great example. In Germany, 2 hours during the noontime, they're actually discharging excess solar energy and wind power into the ground because the grid can't take it. So you can imagine 2 hours of the day they're producing solar power and wind power, and the grid can't take it, they're discharging into the ground. So nearly 2.9 billion euros is wasted every year in Germany because you don't have battery storage. Thank you very much. And our vision, Altech Chemicals, is to be a gigawatt supplier of batteries. Thank you.
Thank you, Iggy, and as usual, a top-flight presentation. Thank you very much. Meeka Metals Managing Director Tim Davidson is a qualified mining engineer with experience taking resource projects through economic studies and into production. He joins us today to give us an update on the drilling and development programs Meeka have going on both the Murchison and Albany Fraser province and what's next for the company. Please welcome Tim Davidson.
Thanks very much, Jerry. And what amazing technology that that Iggy's guys are developing. I know where I'll be going to get some seasoning for my lunch. If I don't have enough, I'll visit Iggy's booth and get some salt from him. But now on to Meeka. So from a corporate perspective, a really experienced board and management team, and that we're led by Paul Chapman, who really doesn't need any introduction in the resources space. Anyone that's been around in this sector and investing in this space for any length of time would recognise that name. He was obviously instrumental in the development of Silver Lake Resources and a number of other really successful, or taking a number of other really successful junior companies through to mid-tier and production status. In addition to that, obviously Roger Steiner-Price, very experienced lawyer, Perth-based, recently involved with the Rebecca discovery with Apollo Consolidated, and Paul Adams, who is the managing director of Spectrum, discovery of Penny West, and that asset's now in production. Ramelius is driving that. So a really experienced board and a track record of discovery and generating value through discovery, and taking projects through to development. So the other important point that I'll make about the board and the management team is that we're backing ourselves with our own money. To date, we've put $2.8 million into this business. 550 grand of that the board put in a couple of weeks ago when shareholders approved our participation in the August placement. So we're putting our own money into this company, backing ourselves to succeed, and we think we've got some really exciting projects to deploy that capital into. Now, in terms of the capital structure, we closed yesterday 7.2 cents, gives us a market cap of around $75 million. We've got a strong treasury position. As I said, we're well funded. That allows us to put that money into the ground and get effectively drill these fantastic and exciting targets that we've got in front of us, both in the gold space and some rare earths opportunities that I'll talk to. And the rare earths, something that's evolving, is something that's evolving very quickly. It's generating a lot of interest. There's some big names moving into the space, and we think we've got some fantastic projects. So cash position 8.3 at the end of last quarter, and an enterprise value of around $70 million. Now, what underpins the value of that, or what underpins the value of the business, $70 million EV? Well, we believe it's our 1.1 million ounce gold mineral resource in the Murchison. Now, that resource was something that we updated mid last year, so it's been about 12 months, slightly over 12 months since we completed the last resource update. In that period, we've drilled somewhere in the order of 50,000 meters of drilling. In the last 6 months alone, we've drilled 35,000 meters of drilling going into a target called St. Anne's that sits outside that resource in the Murchison. So very exciting opportunities. We see that resource growing. We've got a resource update for the Turnberry deposit later this year, and then the St. Anne's deposit, which has never had a resource attached to it. That'll be in December or early January at this stage. We're working through that. So really exciting. Outside of the Murchison, but something complementary in the gold space, is a project called Circle Valley. We went down there in June last year, drilled a couple of air core lines, intercepted some thick zones of gold mineralization in the oxide horizon. We followed that up in January of this year with some RC drilling into the fresh rock. And our very first hole, January, 23 meters at 5 grams per ton. So that's a really exciting opportunity for us. We've followed that up this year with a series of RC drill holes, and just in October we've completed 5 diamond drill holes down there to give us some structural information, and seeing some really exciting things there. While we were down there at Circle Valley looking for gold with this regional air core drilling, the XRF data, the geochemical data that we were using to guide our exploration for the gold and the pathfinders for the gold, that picked up rare earth elements, really high level rare earth enrichment within the clay horizon. We did some more work on that over the course of the last 12 months. And following that, we've set about in December, January, February of this year, or last year, this year, we set about securing a significant package of land around our Circle Valley project where we identified initially those rare earth elements. So now we've got a rare earth portfolio of land over 2,500 square kilometres. We've got drilling over about 1,100 square kilometres of that. It's looking really positive. We're working on the MET as well, and that's coming back really positive as well. So to start off with, I'll just touch on the Murchison and why we're so excited by what we see there. Now, we own this project 100%. We took control of it in February of last year, so we've had it for about 2 years. I mentioned we put about 50,000 meters into the ground since we took control of this project. Most of that has been drilling outside of the resource. We're not looking at resource extensional stuff, although we have done a little bit of drilling with extend the existing resources. Most of that drilling is going into fresh terrain that hasn't had any drill holes put into it, and we're getting some fantastic results. So where we do have the mineral resources, they have been drilled out very well. Close space drilling, close centers. So we've got a really high level of understanding of the geology down there and what hosts the grade and where the grade sits. 65% of those mineral resources, the 1.1 million ounces, sits in the measured and indicated classification. So it's a very good understanding of the geology where we have the gold. And then outside of that, we've got a really fertile belt with very limited drilling. So it's a fantastic opportunity to follow up. Now, guiding exploration is a fantastic data set. We've got significant geophysical data, gravity, aeromag, subaudiomagnetics. We've got an extensive drill hole database, and I mentioned most of that drilling is into the 2 deposits, Andywell and Turnberry. Outside of those 2 deposits, the greenstone belt has had very limited drilling, but given we know that there's 1.1 million ounces in the ground where we have drilled, it's obviously very fertile geology. So one of the targets that we've hit recently, we started drilling at St. Anne's in June of this year. That was meant to be a 3-month program. We've extended that. We'll be there until at least Christmas. We've put 35,000 meters into St. Anne's over that last 6-month period. We've just mobilized a diamond drill rig to that prospect. We're drilling some deeper holes. We're seeing some really good signs in the diamond core, and we've also got an air core, a rig that's got the ability to do air core and RC drilling, and that's continuing to test the strike of that deposit to the north. So we've got 2 drill rigs there. That's going to extend out to Christmas at least, and then potentially into next year, results dependent. So significant amount of drilling going into St. Anne's, looking really good. Now, if you were to draw a section that what hosts the mineralization in that Turnberry St. Anne's corridor, there's a big greenstone belt that runs approximately north-south through there, basalts, magnetic dolerite unit. There's a shear zone that runs north-south. The shear zone runs north-south through that mafic unit, rips everything apart. If we were to draw a sectional line through those 2 deposits, through St. Anne's and Turnberry, this is what you'd see. They're about 3.5 kilometres apart. There's been about 90,000 metres of drilling into Turnberry to date. We've put about 35,000 metres of drilling into St. Anne's in the last 6 months, and these are the results we're getting. Some very high-grade mineralisation. We've only really effectively tested the oxide horizon to date. I mentioned we've just mobilised a diamond drill rig to site to go and test what it looks like in the fresh rock, and we're seeing some really good early signs from that, albeit that we don't have the assays for the diamond drilling as yet. Now, the mineralisation, I mentioned it's hosted in this MEK unit, runs approximately north-south. The shear zone is this 100-metre wide, approximately 100-metre wide corridor that runs north-south through that MEK unit. We see some tight folding in that geology, and then these oblique cross-cutting structures. And where you get the confluence of those three things, the MEK unit that runs north-south, that folding, and these oblique cross-cutting structures inside that north-south shear zone, that's where we see the strong gold mineralisation. It's absolutely where we see the gold at Turnberry, and it's where we see the gold at St. Anne's. And the exciting thing about that is in the aeromagnetic data, it's really high resolution data. It's flown on 25-metre centres. We see that same structural setting and same geological setting to the north of St. Anne's, so between Turnberry and St. Anne's, and to the north of Turnberry. So we know it's a fertile greenstone belt. We know it's only had limited drilling outside of that deposit at Turnberry and now St. Anne's, which we started drilling in June. But given the size of the resource at Turnberry and the gold mineralisation we're seeing at St. Anne's, we know there's a lot of gold there. We know that it's a fertile system, and that gives us plenty of targets to go and test once we've finished drilling out St. Anne's. Now, you'll notice that 3.5 kilometres, it's only been lightly tested to date, less than 3,000 metres. That's the same to the north of Turnberry. So again, very limited drilling, and a lot of that drilling falls outside of that approximate 100-metre shear corridor that cuts through the mafics there. So it's really a compelling opportunity for us to go and deploy this capital in, do the drilling, and we're getting some great results. Now, if we were to cut a section through the oxide horizon at St. Anne's, this is what you'd see. It's not a big supergene plume with nothing underneath it. It looks to be fairly consistent in width, although it does narrow up. We're seeing it narrows up a little bit in the fresh rock. The oxide horizon extends down to between sort of 80 and 100 metres below surface. You can see in the chip tray on the left-hand side of the slide there that it's a solid quartz vein. We've actually twinned that hole with a diamond drill. It's not a big supergene plume. It's a solid quartz vein. You can see the photo of the nuggety gold that we're seeing in those chips. Big fingernail-sized chunks of gold. Big, quite a large tail on that pan as well. So very high-grade mineralisation. Very nuggety gold. Very exciting. The other thing that we're seeing, and I mentioned we put 35,000 metres into this deposit over the last 6 months. The more drilling we're doing, the more we're discovering, as you would expect. We have been focused up until now on the western side, which is the mafic felsic volcanoclastic contact. The shear zone rips through there. That's where we've focused all of our drilling. We did some step out lines over to the east, and about 100 metres to the east on the sediment mafic contact, we're seeing mineralisation now there as well. So this, what we're calling the wood lode, this lode here, this has had a number of drill holes put into it. We released the first assay results in a couple of weeks ago in early November. We're now testing it with some diamond drilling down dip. We're also testing to the north of that wood lode, and we're seeing some really exciting things in the geochemistry and the XRF data. So St. Anne's is an exciting opportunity for us. We're getting fantastic grades. Up until now, it's been focused in the oxide horizon. We're certainly following that up and extending or attempting to extend that mineralisation to the north and getting positive results in the oxide. We're now doing the diamond drilling at depth, and that's coming back really positively as well. And if I just flick to the next slide, this is what the mineralisation looks like in the limited drilling that we've got into the fresh rock. This is an RC drill hole. We're now drilling below that with diamond core. One of the first 5 RC drill holes that we drilled hit 4 metres at 87.5 grams. Again, really nuggety gold. You can see that really, really fingernail size nuggety chunks of gold in those RC chips. It's your typical Western Australian Archean lode gold deposit, quartz hosted. It does appear to boudinage, so pinch and swell. We're seeing that in the drilling as well, but very exciting. And then in terms of what it looks like in the diamond core, this is the very first diamond drill hole that we've drilled. This intercepted the lode about 20 metres below where we hit that 4 metres at 87 grams. So this hole here, and that's what it looks like. So we're not seeing the 20 to 30 metre wide quartz lode we saw in the oxide horizon, but we're seeing it's sort of a 3 to 5 metre wide quartz lode in the shear zone. Lots of sulfides, really exciting. Drilling's ongoing. This is from the western contact, so the mafic felsic volcanoclastic contact. We're now drilling on the eastern contact below the wood lode into that sediment mafic contact and getting some great results there as well. Assays for that diamond drilling, we expect to get those late December, early January, and that'll be ongoing through January, February, March of next year as that core is processed. Now, something very complementary in the gold space, and the reason that we headed down to the Albany-Fraser province is our Circle Valley project. We started drilling in June of last year. When we went down there with an air core rig, we were drilling some broad-spaced reconnaissance lines, north-south, trying to work out what the underlying geology looked like. And two of our first holes hit a broad zone of low-grade mineralization in the oxide horizon, effectively from surface. Now, that is important because in this terrain, you don't expect to see, it's not like the Yilgarn where you see enrichment, supergene enrichment of that oxide horizon. You actually see gold, depletion of the gold in that oxide horizon. So the fact that we were seeing in the air core drilling very high levels of gold was very exciting. We followed that up in January of this year. Our very first RC drill hole into the fresh rock hit 23 meters at 5 grams per ton. We've then followed that up with a number of other holes. And the exciting thing about this is not only the fact that we're hitting this mineralization with a number of drill holes along strike and down dip from that initial hole that we drilled 23 at 5. The exciting thing is that these holes that we've drilled are the first holes that have ever been drilled into the fresh rock on this tenure. The other thing that we identified when we were down there drilling these RC holes at Anomaly A is we drilled some additional lines, north-south lines across that, what appears to be a MEK unit. And in that air core drilling, what we saw at Anomaly A, we see that again in the north. Low-level gold in the oxide horizon. That's never been tested in the fresh rock. That target is 5 times the size of what we see at Anomaly A. So Anomaly A is a gold in soil and air core anomaly. Gold in air core drilling anomaly in that oxide horizon extends 1.2 kilometers east to west by 400 meters north to south. The anomalism in the north is 5 kilometers east to west and about 1 kilometer north to south. So it's early days. We're really excited by what we see. Certainly excited by not only the geochemistry we're seeing down there, which we compare to some other deposits and is very favorable, but also the fact we're seeing these broad zones of gold in the RC drilling. We've just completed a diamond drill program, a short diamond drill program into the fresh rock to understand some structural information and determine a little bit more about the shear zone that hosts this mineralization. That's been fantastic. It's going to guide our drill program kicking off in January of next year when we go back and start a much larger strike extensional drilling program at Anomaly A and start testing this northern anomaly. And we expect to get the assay results from that diamond drilling in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So we've sort of guided the market. January we'll get those released, and we'll that's looking very prospective. Now, the reason that we went down to Circle Valley and the Albany-Fraser was the gold, and something that we identified in the XRF data was the rare earth mineralization, enrichment in neodymium, yttrium. We followed that up with some lab test work, and we got some really exciting results, really high-grade mineralization in the clay horizon. We then set about securing significant additional tenure. We pegged the Cascade project at sort of December, January, February, and now we've got 2,500 square kilometres down there. We own it 100%. It's tier one, it's serviced by some fantastic infrastructure. It's obviously a tier one location based in, being in Western Australia and close to Esperance, the regional service centre. Just quickly touching on what it looks like at Circle Valley. Again, we've only just started this work on the rare earths, broad space reconnaissance drilling, looking for the gold. We've reanalyzed that for rare earths. It looks to be an 8 to 12 meter thick clay horizon. You can see on the left-hand side, depletion at surface, enrichment at about the level where the water table sits. Again, above, generally above 1,000 ppm, where we see the high grades and a really high proportion of NdPr, which is those magnet metals which drive the economics of these projects. Outside of Circle Valley, our Cascade project, this is 10 times the size of Circle Valley in terms of land area. Circle Valley is 220 square kilometres. This is about 2,300 square kilometres. We've got drilling that covers 1,000 square kilometres. Again, early stage reconnaissance style drilling, kilometre spacing, but it shows there's high grade in the clays and covers a significant area. Outside of the southern corridor in the north, we don't have any drilling, but we've got some very compelling targets from surface auger sampling. This target in the south has grades up to 633 ppm. It's 20 meters east to west. It's 20 kilometers east to west. It's 10 kilometers north to south. Never been drilled. And based on what we see at Circle Valley in that southern corridor, it looks to be very prospective. Finally, the metallurgy. This is probably the most important point. This dictates where the projects get developed and whether they're economic. We've started down the path of working through that metallurgical process, understanding what the flow sheet looks like. We're getting some great results with the leaching. We need to refine that. We need to work on the early stage upgrade work to ensure that we get a high grade concentrate product to then leach. This work's going to be ongoing for the next 12 to 18 months, but early stage is very prospective and very positive. Finally, our work plan for the next 12 months met with the rare earths, drilling for the rare earths at both Circle Valley and Cascade. Lots going on with the gold, both at Circle Valley and in the Murchison. And we're certainly, if anything, if the results we're getting in the gold and the Murchison are anything to go by to date, we expect to get some fantastic results over the next couple of months. So thanks very much. We are going to be at the booth, obviously, today and tomorrow. Stop by if you want any more details. There's lots more to talk about. And thank you very much for your time.
Caprice Resources Managing Director Andrew Muir oversees a high-quality focused, WA-focused explorer focusing on base and battery metals near Northampton and gold in the Murchison region. Andrew joined Caprice in mid-2021. Prior to that, he ran NTM Gold for 3.5 years until it merged with Dacian Gold in early 2021. He's originally a geo, but he spent 13 years in finance. Please welcome Andrew Muir.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Caprice story. And again, thanks very much to the RIU crew for putting on another great conference. So a quick snapshot, high level, why invest in Caprice? Fantastic quality projects. Northampton, polymetallic, high grades, major land position, and we're looking at some new mineralisation concepts. The Murchison, gold focused, strategic location, fantastic neighbourhood, and highly prospective. In terms of risk reward, outstanding opportunity, highly leveraged to exploration success with high impact drilling in the near future, and as well as some good quality news flow. And finally, management very much aligned to success. We got 20% of the board, the board has 20% of the company, long-term holders, experienced team. Corporately, look like most of us in the junior end of town, the share price hasn't been that good. However, we can't really worry too much about the macro environment. We need to keep on doing what we're doing, focus on what we can control, and that's doing good quality exploration on our ground. A little bit unusual for a junior like us that's been listed for about 4 years. We've still only got 80 odd million shares on issue, so it's a nice tight structure. However, as you can see there, relating to the risk reward, we've got an EV of about $3 million. So a little bit of exploration success, and that'll shoot up pretty quickly. In terms of board and management, got a pretty good mix of grey hair, legal experience, technical, corporate, and boots on ground. And probably the most important person on the page there is Chris Orshot. He's the brains behind the operation in terms of geology and strategy on the ground. So overview of our assets, we've got the Northampton polymetallic project. It's, as I said, it's polymetallic. It's a historic high-grade mineral field. Had about 120 odd years of production of base metals. But there's been minimal exploration in the last 50 years. And then there's the Murchison gold projects. As I said, strategic location, high grades, good infrastructure, and we've got processing plants nearby. Zooming in a bit onto Northampton. So it's a large project, almost 1,200 square Ks. The area is a historic high-grade mining centre. Over 100 high-grade massive sulphide deposits were mined between the 1850s and 1970s. Some good quality lead, copper, zinc, and silver there. 75% of the mines were actually focused on lead. However, a lot of them actually stopped when they got to the copper-rich zones. We initially had the areas in red that you can see there, the historic mining areas. But after a strategic review, we decided to bolt on the other tenements. And interestingly, up until about a year ago when we acquired all this ground around us was open. So we basically went out and pegged it. And at the very south, we purchased the Yungaro tenements. So the area we think is highly prospective. The historic mines stuck out at surface, so they're obviously pretty easy to find. As I said, we expanded the project in 2021 following sort of a project review and where the other areas of potential could be, because having those two small initial areas was quite good, but we think we recognise that we need a little bit more scale and we need a bigger footprint. And also the last thing we wanted to do was go in there and put some drill holes in, get some good grades, and then find out that the peers came in and basically snapped up all the ground. So we're very much conscious of being first movers in this part of the world, make sure we get our foothold on the ground, and then start with steady and systematic exploration. As you can see there, in 2020, we did some RC drilling at the Wheel Fortune prospect and returned some pretty good grades, including 5 meters at 17% lead and as well as 12 meters at 3% copper. So some pretty good grades. So in terms of what are we doing there, it is in farming country, which has probably been a detriment to historical exploration. That's probably why there hasn't been much exploration in the past 50 years. However, we see that as an opportunity. Because there hasn't been much work done, we basically can get in there and review all the data and basically get boots on ground and really start to work up some of the concepts that have never really been looked at. So the first part of that is obviously putting access agreements in place. So we've got an access agreement now with a pastoros over the Yungaro project. And we'll be looking at doing drilling there. We were planning to do that early December, but due to delays in the department, that'll probably be pushed out to early 23 now. We've just completed some detailed aeromagnetics, and they've given us some really interesting insights into the structures, and you'll see a nice pretty picture over page. The other aspect about Northampton that's been really significantly underdone is that the area is known to host a lot of pegmatites. There's a lot of good granite source rocks there. So we've undertaken a regional prospectivity analysis for battery metals and rare metals, and significantly no work's been done on this in the past. So I was up there a couple of weeks ago sampling pegmatites. So we've put those into the labs last week, so it'll be interesting to see what they come up with in roughly about a month's time. So definitely something a little bit out of left field, but as I said, the more we look at Northampton, the better it gets. So just zooming in and touching on the air mag that I just mentioned. So we basically got this data late last week. So this is the raw data, hasn't been processed as yet. You can see the central picture is the original sort of core-spaced air mag, and on the left and the right there are two areas that we've recently flown. And it's really highlighted some interesting features that we hadn't really looked at before. So we'll get this processed and do an interp on it, but it's showed up a lot of structures and a lot of very intriguing features that we hadn't really looked at before. So there's a lot more work to do. And as I said, the more we look at Northampton, the more intrigued and interested in the geology that we get. We think it's got some potential for quite a broad range of different minerals. On to Murchison, Murchison Gold Projects, fantastic location, proven gold district. Over 15 million ounces been mined in this part of the world. Great infrastructure with your Westgold and Ramelius's plants, both within trucking distance. We've got the Great Northern Highway going through the Island Gold Project. And we're also surrounded by some pretty good neighbours. We've got Musgrave Minerals and the Evolution JV wrapping us on three sides. Yet, ironically, the three projects we've got are relatively underexplored, particularly given their location. Zooming a little bit further onto the Island Gold Project. So whilst there's been historic small-scale high-grade mining on the island that you can see in the red dots, we acquired this about 2 years ago, and the historic work had really focused on those the high-grade mining. We call that the island because it effectively is an island. It sticks out of a salt lake called Lake Austin, and that has pretty much seen 100% of exploration effort up until the start of this year. Lake Austin, or the lake area that we have, that covers the remaining 75%. And we stepped off the island for the first time this year and focused in on the Solace prospect. So over the past roughly 18 months, we've done about 20,000 metres of drilling on the island, both air core and RC, and it's really turned out some pretty good numbers. Zooming into Solace, so this was the very first time that anyone had stepped off the island and done any work. This is to the southern extent, or southern end of the Island Gold Project. It's on the fringes of Lake Austin. We were looking to get a lake rig to traverse the lake surface. However, they were very difficult to come by. So we pivoted and used the land-based air core rig and did a series of traverses, roughly 400-metre line spaced, just to see what this looked like. We didn't know what the geology was. We didn't know if there was any mineralisation there. We had a pretty good feeling that there were structures there based on the ground gravity that we'd done. So that very first pass program came up with a gold anomaly over 1 kilometre long, which was a fantastic result, given that it had never been drilled before. The size of the anomaly, and also was proof of concept that there's gold that's exists that isn't actually on the island. So we're pretty pleased with that. We followed that up with 2 RC programs, 28 holes for just under 3,000 metres. Got some really good grades and widths, highlights being 4 at 4.4, and which included 1 metre 11, and 4 at 3.4, which included 2 metres at 6.4. Again, we've only done 2 small RC programs, so fantastic results, and definitely more work to do there. The other drilling that we did prior to Solace, we did a couple of RC programs on the island itself. We were following up some of the historic work, but also testing some of the large BIFs that the mineralisation is associated with, and we got a number of good quality results there. Obviously, the highlight being 10 at 16, as well as 9 at 4.7, etc. So there's more work to do there in time. The other thing to note is most of the drilling's been relatively shallow and with an average depth of just under 100 metres. So more work to do there in due course. We also acquired the Cutting Warra and Big Bell South roughly 12 months ago. It's an 80-20 JV with Golden State Mining. Geology and structures look really, really good. Cutting Warra, it's close to the Cutting Warra Shear, really good structural environment. And Big Bell South, it's an interpreted extension of the structures and greenstone belt that hold the Big Bell deposit. Likewise, had largely minimal exploration, so we'll probably go in there and do some soil sampling and some air core, as well as probably some ground-based geophysics once we can get access. Just zooming in again on a little bit more on the Cutting Warra, just highlighting the complexity of the geology and all the targets that we've identified. So that's us in simplistically exploring on all fronts. Northampton Polymetallic Project, historic high-grade base metals, great land position. We've got some really interesting new mineralisation concepts, and we'll be drilling there soon. And then there's the rare metals assessment. As I said, there's been no work done on that. Really, really interesting to see what the samples that I collected last week come up with, and also what the new air mag data shows up, both structurally but also with radiometrics, etc. Murchison Gold, great location, outstanding neighbourhood, highly prospective, and we've been drilling a fair bit over there over the past sort of 18 months, and we'll be back there again at some point. So again, risk reward, largely at shell value, pretty minimal downside from where we are, but substantial upside based on the work that we're doing and the quality of the ground that we've got. And of course, like any company, we're assessing new projects. We recognise we probably need to diversify the current commodity suite. So we're actively reviewing projects, but as long as it makes sense and there's geological credibility associated with them, so watch this space. So that's us. If you want to come and have a chat to myself or Chris, we're at booth 39. I'll be around for the next couple of days. Look forward to talking to you.
Southern Mining is focused on creating value for shareholders through discoveries. The company's value is underpinned by a strategic land holding in the Duketon Belt, which includes the advanced Southern Star gold projects, which abuts Regis Resources tenure to the north. The company also has exciting growth potential at its East Leverton nickel and Edinburgh Park gold projects. Newly minted Managing Director Matthew Keane is here to present why, and you may be getting on the ground floor of the next De Grey. Please make him welcome, Matthew Keane.
Thanks very much. I am going to be followed by De Grey. Andy here is going to get up and give you one of the great success stories of the West. But I think of this as, if you look back in the 70s, a good analogy, you had AC/DC used to be a backup band for Black Sabbath. Obviously AC/DC went on to be a world beater, so maybe hopefully we're that supporting act for the show today. Anyway, I'll go through my slides relatively quickly. I know we're getting close to lunch here. It's a very simple proposition, but I think you'll agree and see the value in it. Okay, so where we're based, so we're an Australian-based company. We're looking for nickel, copper, and gold, primarily gold, but also the base metal side. Our project areas, we're based around existing infrastructure and mills in Queensland, and our main focus area currently is in Western Australia. So I think a good way to think about this in terms of you want to break down our asset base. I'll go to the next slide, bear with me. Okay, so our main projects in Western Australia, you've got effectively our base load underlying value is in our Duketon Gold Project, which sits at the base of the Duketon Belt just below Regis Resources. The spice in the project and where we're currently drilling is our East Laverton Nickel Project. So we've got the rig turning at present, and I'm anticipating what we'll see in the next couple of days. And we've got Moho Resources, which is just below the town of Laverton. All these projects are surrounding the Laverton area. Moho Resources, it's got existing resource, modest 55,000 ounces, but that sits within about 40 kilometres of about 3 existing mills. The last one of those being Dacian Gold's Mount Morgans, which is probably where put out a request for tolling material in the last couple of days. So I'm going to start there with our Duketon Gold Project. So just a little bit on the Duketon Belt, first of all. We all know Regis quite well. It's been quite a success story, but it is a very immature belt. So the Duketon Gold Belt really only came into its own in the early 2000s with the development of Regis's Golden Garden Well, Rosemont and Moolart Well. So we've got 10% of the belt sitting at the base of those deposits. All of our prospects, we have 3 main prospects, Amy Clark, Golden Boulder and Southern Star. They all sit on the same structures which host the Regis Resources deposits. So I'm going to talk through these very briefly one at a time, but really the underlying value I think in the company comes from our Southern Star deposit, which I'll just get my pointer, that's sitting over here. So that's roughly about 40 to 50 kilometres from the Garden Well processing facility. But an important point to point out just on this map is this is the Ben Hur deposit, which is Regis. Ben Hur is currently in development. There's a haul road currently being constructed. So Regis is tracking a fair way down south to get to this deposit. The reason they're doing that is their deposits are now moving from open pit to underground. The rocks are getting harder. They're chasing some open pit material. So our opportunity here is to size up some resources and of course make those appetizing for the mills and the hungry mills to the north. So first of all, Southern Star, look, we arguably could release a modest resource on this at present. It's very well drilled out to roughly 40 metre centres. So Southern Star sits here, roughly about 4 kilometres south of that Ben Hur deposit, which is Regis. It's open in all directions, but we do have a base load, as I say, not deposit, but a prospective deposit, which has been drilled out relatively finely. We're going to be hitting the ground here next year. We're open to the north, to the south. We've got some great geochem data, which we released to the market just a few weeks ago. But importantly, we've just realised that, in fact, the Ben Hur trend, which we thought we were drilling and where we sized up most of our anomalism, gold anomalism, we're actually sitting to the east of that. So we haven't even tested the Ben Hur trend. So just in my diagram on the right, that's that green polygon. And just as a point of reference, Ben Hur, modest resource, about 390,000 ounces. It's got about 130,000 metres. We're only 20,000 metres into our Southern Star deposit. Okay, and I say there's 3 prospects we're chasing here in the Duketon Belt. This is the second of those. This is Amy Clark. So Here we've just recently extended this and defined 5 kilometers of anomalous gold. So this is gold in soils and shallow air core drilling. We've hit grades up to 8 grams, going 6.7. Very little work done, amazingly, considering how close it is to other mills. This is an area we're really going to hit hard next year. We've literally got around about 5 kilometers or 4 kilometers of continuous strike. We've got anomalism almost in a gun barrel straight line sitting on the shear. And we've only got very shallow air core drilling there to date. Okay, and look, if there's one slide that you sort of have a look at and take a snapshot of and think, okay, I'm looking forward to seeing this drilled next year, this is probably it. This is what I like. I've been with the company now only 6 to 8 weeks, but coming in the door, I went out in the field the first couple of weeks, and this just really is screaming out for drilling. It's called Golden Boulder. We've got roughly 5 kilometers of anomalous gold. So we've got 3 gold trends, a lot of historic workings, and intense historic workings. These are workings where people have pulled out real gold, but very little modern exploration. We've had a little scratch at it. We put a couple of drill holes in and pulled out some grades, 5 meters at 3 grams per ton. But we're going to hit this next year and really have a red hot crack at this and do some almost pattern drilling right the way along. If we can get the 5 kilometers of strike, we'll have a go. But at this stage, we've got at least 3 kilometers of that permitted, heritage done, ready to go. Looking forward to getting in this one. Okay, changing mode a little bit. So, I've mentioned there's a couple of sort of parts of this story. There's the base load value, which I think is in our Duketon project. This is the spice. So this is our East Laverton project, and I'll just outline it quickly what we're looking at here. So we're chasing nickel, although it does have gold prospectivity. We've got a large intrusive body, the bit I'm circling here now. So that's currently where we're drilling. So that's akin to mineralization styles like the Bushveld complex in South Africa, Nova Bollinger. That's what we're chasing there. It's a layered intrusive with also conduit potential, conduit nickel copper PGE potential. On top of that, we've got roughly 13 kilometers of strike of komatiitic nickel prospectivity. So this is your more traditional Campbell style nickel mineralization. This hasn't been touched, and that's really our program for next year. But talking to what we're doing at present, we have 2 EM plates, which we're targeting with drilling as we speak. We have a small plate here, relatively shallow, and the one we've just pre-collared with an RC, and now we're drilling the diamond, is this conductor plate L076. So the pre-collar is complete. We now got the diamond rig turning, and we'll see what comes of it. So we're looking for nickel copper PGEs, and next year we'll be kicking off. We're doing EM initially, and then hopefully following up with drilling on this large komatiitic sequence, which hasn't been tested for nickel. It's only been tested for gold and platinum group elements in historic work, and very little at that. Very little drill holes have actually hit that ultramafic sequence. Okay, so jumping across the other side of the country, you've got the base load, you've got the spice. This is the sleeping giant, which we're about to awaken next year. So we've got 1,700 square kilometres surrounding the Mount Carlton mine at our Edinburgh Park project. So in the centre here, this is the Mount Carlton mine. It was Evolution. It was their effectively the start of Project Evolution. Navarro recently took over that mine. It is another very hungry mill needing resources. So we surround that almost 360 degrees, and we've got a huge land package. We're chasing gold, copper mineralisation, so high and low sulfidation epithermal, as well as porphyry style mineralisation. We've done a lot of work over this year, so we're actually at a point now the target generation work is done. Some of that work was actually helped along by a major who was very interested and did some hyperspectral work for us, contributed a number of projects that we now have. We had a base load of 13 targets, which we're going to chase. More recent work on top of that is to find another 16 targets. There's a lot of work to do here, but we've defined at least 2 of those projects now where we're drill ready, and we're looking to get on the ground to drill next year. This will most likely be after the wet season in Queensland, which is roughly March, April. So this, very little value in our share price, but it's really a watch this space for next year. As I say, sleeping giant, which we're about to awaken. I'll finish off on our corporate slide and just leave that up there. But one thing I'll point out, as I've got this on screen, we've got a very strong board and management team. We've got real skin in the game. So directors have got well upwards of 25% of the company. So we're invested. We're along for the ride in terms of success. And 2023 is going to be a very big year for Southern Star. We're going to be on the ground. We're going to hit these targets hard, and we're going to hopefully come up to some success We own all of our projects 100%, and all of our projects are within 40 kilometres of existing and hungry mills. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Matt. Just a reminder that networking drinks will be held in the exhibition area from 5:15, sponsored by CSA Global Mining Industry Consultants. The Grey Mining activities are focused on the 100% owned Malina Gold Project in the Pilbara region here in WA. Here, De Grey has made a large-scale, high-value, near-surface gold discovery at an area called Hemi. Andy Beckwith has over 30 years of geological and management experience. His most recent roles include building Westgold's to circa 50 million ounces of resources as managing director, and prior to that, senior roles with Anglo Gold Australia. Andy Beckwith, please make him welcome.
Thanks for the introduction, and to RIU for letting us present. Obviously, we're talking about our major Hemi discovery, where we're at with after the PFS and beyond. We are going to make forward-looking statements. I have to tell you that, I'm afraid. So consider yourself told. Compliment statements, etc. I would make an acknowledgement to the traditional custodians in the area we work. In particular, Gary Yarra, we've been working very strongly with them because Hemi basically, and probably 2/3 of our resources deposits fall on their ground. Lots of clearances, lots of heritage clearances, and very advanced on a mining agreement. Quick corporate snapshot, 1.6 billion shares, sounds a lot, 2.9, just under 2 billion market cap today. Roughly just over 200, circa 200 of cash after a recent raising. We're in the 200 ASX now. Gold Road just own just under 20% of us, roughly about 19.5, I think, after the capital raising. So what's been the impact of Hemi? Probably a lot of people have heard the story. I've been with the company since 2016. The last 3 years have been amazing. But took 3 months for the Hemi discovery to be recognised by the market, even though we had good results in December 19. But since then, we've obviously lit the fire in the Pilbara region for gold. It's taken 3 years to basically get us to 8.5 million ounces at Hemi, 10.6 million ounces overall, and a maiden 5.1 million ounce reserve after the PFS. So 3 years from the discovery hole drilling was last Monday, 2 days ago. And since then, we've done a lot of work. So some of the recent achievements, obviously a very attractive PFS, the 5-odd million ounce reserve at 1.5 grams. We've added 1.7 million ounces while we've tried to increase the quality of the resources in the last 12 months. And we're now sitting at 8.5 million ounces within 2.5 years of drilling. The resource is back in drilling to April this year. And we've cracked 1 million meters of drilling in the last 3 years. Okay, that's virtually from Perth to Newman, 450 meters of air core drilling, 450 kilometers of air core drilling, about 430 kilometers of RC drilling, and 130 kilometers of diamond drilling. Peak of 16 rigs. We're back at about 6 at the moment. And probably more importantly for many others, and including ourselves, Pilbara is now a gold destination, not just an iron ore destination, lithium. So PFS, the top 5 gold producer potentially in the next few years. 6.4 million ounces to be mined in over just under 14 years. That's with a 10 million tonne throughput. It's got an NPV of just under $4 billion pre-tax and 2.7 post-tax based on the PFS. Capital cost is about $1 billion, just over, when you include the pre-strip of the cover. And it's a low operating cost. Pays itself back from the Brolga pit in less than 2 years. Very well located, and you'll see this better in the movie that you're about to see. But the main thing here is close to really good infrastructure, roads, gas pipelines, transmission lines, and the port itself. overlook the port itself to bring things in. The PFS averages 540,000 ounces per annum for the first 10 years and peaks at just over 600,000 ounces in year 5. Like I said, we'll be targeting a top 5 gold mine in Australia at the time of production, and that's relative to current. It's ranking quite well in the top 3 at the current producers, but they're all obviously going to be pushing forward as well over the next few years. Like I said, it's a low-cost producer. We see lots of upside beyond the PFS metrics. Obviously, we're pushing to increase the resource base at Hemi itself and the regional deposits, new optimizations on the resources. We're looking to push more indicated into the pit shells to increase the reserves. We still have to put the regional deposits into the reserves. So we would probably be looking at, based on the PFS, 1 million ounces of reserves, hopefully coming out of there. At that sort of order of magnitude. We need to look at underground potential beyond the pits and obviously new discoveries in the belt. Here's a quick timeline of where we're at right now. So basically in parallel, we're doing a debt funding process has already started. The DFS has already started, well into it. Environmental approval process is underway, soon to be lodged. We aim to be into construction mode by late 2023, roughly 18 months to 2-year build, and be hopefully into production, all going well, by late 25. So we're going to see a movie now, hopefully put some of that into a bit of a visual context. 2 hours north of Perth by flying. It's one of the largest undeveloped gold mines in Australia. We're going to zoom into the Mallina Gold Project in itself. That'll show the tenure is basically covering the Mallina Basin sediments, just south of Port Hedland. This is showing you the road access, main highways going virtually straight through the project and along the north, the power line, gas pipeline, and these are major infrastructure things. Obviously the port itself, it's 85 kilometres by road from Port Hedland. And some of the regional things you're not seeing here are the new renewables that have been put into this area. So 8.5 million ounce discovery, 2.5 years. Our other deposits already had 2.2 million ounces, but nobody recognised that prior to the Hemi. 10.6 all up. Zooming into Hemi now. So this is a bit of a drilling history since the discovery holes. You'll see them come on very shortly. So November 2019, 3 years ago, almost to the day. And this was an amazing time. So June, we pretty much worked out where Aquila, Brolga and Falcon were and Crow. And then Eagle started to come in 2000, late 2000, early 21. And you'll see the drilling starts to fill in as we go through our PFS. And that's obviously dominated on the deposits as we tried to build up the indicated resources. So that's to the resource timeframe there was April. And now we're sort of seeing where we are right now. So now we're just zooming, seeing some 3D of just the RC diamond drilling and the gold assays. And these are the deposits as they come on, give you some feeling of how they look in 3D. So the thing about Hemi is scale. Okay, it's 3.5 kilometre long system by 2 kilometres, almost interlinked intrusions. The individual deposits. And now we'll just zoom in. And what we'll start to see now is the pit development over the sequence of mining. And it's that 2-year period there where you see Brolga as the main one on the right. That pays for itself, pays for the whole project by year 2. And as we can see, as it goes deeper, basically 2 major pits get formed as they interlink. We're obviously trying to make those deposits bigger and find others. And now we're just going to zoom in and show you, I suppose, what the proposed plant would look like. We're very close to the Great Northern Highway. We're located well, it's sort of basically in the middle of the Yule River to the Turner River on a big sand plain. So now we'll go in and have a look at where the plant will be located and what it looks like. Obviously the ROM pad, first primary crushing through to the grinding circuits, the milling, and then the flotation, which takes out the sulfide, which holds the bulk of the gold in the deposits in the fresh rock. And then those sulfides are oxidized in what you'll see there is the oxidation plant, which is a POX. And then the entire rocks also go through the CIL circuit on top of that as well. So roughly 90% of the gold comes out of the sulfide and 10% comes out of the remaining rock, but well worth putting it all through. So that's a 10 million tonne throughput. In the background, you'll see the tailings dam. Substation over there is a solar farm, but power will more than likely come from the grid. And hopefully that'll be bolstered with lots of renewables as that grid grows throughout the Pilbara. So it almost looks like it's built there, which would be nice one day, hopefully very soon. Here's a sort of three-dimensional showing how the deposits all remain open at depth. Most of the drilling's down to 400 vertical meters. The deposits don't stop there, the geology keeps going. So whatever's in the next 400 vertical meters below the pit is yet to be determined. Along strike potential, well and truly remains open. So this is just a plan. That's the Hemi pits there shown in yellow and the deeper, redder colors where the drilling's occurred. There is lots of upside along strike still. The last 12 months, we have not done as much drilling as we had previously in the regional areas outside the Hemi deposits. Most of the drilling occurred inside the in the pit shells, making sure we could take inferred up to indicated and maximize reserves. So drilling now is focusing on things like depth extensions, where we're getting broad zones of nearly 360 meters at 1.2 grams. Lots of drilling occurring around that and along strike to beef up that that part of the mineralization to see if we can pull the pits down. So that's one nice example. The other one we put out only yesterday, I think it was. We've done some drilling to the west and of Eagle, and that's coming up with some interesting results now that have been hiding in between some of the wider spaced air core drilling and sporadic RC we had today. They're not exceptional results for us, but they're not too dissimilar to what Eagle and Ducon were when we first started. Eagle on Ducon took a while to get going. The first drilling wasn't that great, and now it's turned into, Ducon's now our second biggest deposit. So we have a lot of enthusiasm for the Antwerp area, and particularly that zone where you see the yellow results coming out of. That's going to be hit with some infill drilling in the nearest future. Elsewhere, we have a plethora of other targets along the structural corridor. We're looking for both intrusion-related mineralization, structurally controlled mineralization, like our regional deposits mostly. 150 kilometers of continuous tenure. There's plenty more to come. We'll be drilling for a long time. And really, that's what makes up the project. Hemi is obviously the beast within it. De Grey is hell-bent on pushing forward, building our organisational capability, continuing to drill to find more discoveries and increase resource reserves. And hopefully by late 25 is our target that will be in production and will be around for a long time in the Port Hedland region. Thank you.
And that takes us to lunch on day one, and we are back at 1:45.